All right, strap in everybody because today we're diving deep, deep into a job that's way more interesting than it might seem at first glance. Scrap Metal Operative. We're going way past just surface level here, going to really crack this one wide open. And trust me, it's a lot more than just, crushing cars.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how many people think it's all like monster trucks and those giant electromagnets you see in cartoons. But it's actually pretty intricate work.
I bet. So let's get into it, huh? We've got a whole pile of research here from RoleCatcher. They're the career experts, as always. And they lay out what a scrap metal operative actually does all day. And spoiler alert, it's not what most people think.
Definitely not. Right off the bat, the guide talks about how these guys are cutting up these huge, like massive pieces of scrap metal to get them ready for something called a smelter.
Smelter. Okay, now that sounds kind of serious. Is that where all the real action is?
Well, that's one way to put it. Imagine a furnace, right? But instead of like cookies or whatever, it's full of completely liquid metal, like molten metal heated up to crazy temperatures. That's basically how we take old metal that's not usable anymore and turn it into something totally new.
Oh, so it's like hitting the reset button on like a fridge or an old computer or whatever.
Basically. But before that metal can be reborn, it's got to be like organized and sorted and cut into the right sizes. And that is where our scrap metal operatives come in. They're the first step in the whole recycling like ecosystem.
Okay, so this isn't just like smashing stuff with a sledgehammer. There's real skill involved here. What's the work environment like for these guys?
Yeah.
I mean, RoleCatcher mentions noise, dust, even tosses in something about potentially harmful chemicals and fumes. Sounds kind of intense.
Oh, it's intense for sure. Not a job for someone who scares easily. You're talking about like giant machines, super high temperatures, and you got to be on your toes constantly. Definitely demands a lot, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, you'd have to be pretty tough to handle all that, huh?
You would, but it's not all just brute strength. RoleCatcher really emphasizes that you need real technical skills and you got to have serious attention to detail. I mean, you're using heavy-duty equipment, often working with huge pieces of metal, so one wrong move could be really bad news.
It's like a giant high-stakes jigsaw puzzle or something. So let's say you've got all that down. You've mastered the plasma cutter. You can tell your aluminum from your steel just by looking at it.
Yeah.
What's the career path look like? How do you climb the, I guess you could say the scrap heap ladder?
Well, RoleCatcher maps it out pretty clearly. You start out entry level, probably assisting the more seasoned scrap metal operatives, learning the ropes, all that. Then you move up to junior, which means more responsibility, running equipment on your own.
Working your way up to, what, scrap metal master?
Huh. I guess you could say that. But yeah, by the time you hit that senior scrap metal operative level, you're not just cutting metal, you're running the show. Leading a whole team, showing the new recruits how it's done, even like troubleshooting when something goes wrong.
Wow, so there's a whole management track within scrap metal.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. What do you think makes someone successful making that jump from senior to, like, lead operative?
That's a good question. And it's not just about like knowing the technical stuff inside and out. To really kill it as a lead scrap metal operative, you got to understand how the whole operation works, like from A to Z.
So you need to be part engineer, part safety inspector, part team captain, all in one person.
Exactly. RoleCatcher actually hints at that. They mention lid operatives are often the ones coming up with ways to make things run smoother, even designing totally new procedures. They're the ones who can spot a problem before it even happens, anticipate those hazards and get the whole team working at their best.
So, yeah, it's a lot more than just muscle. It's real leadership. And speaking of skills, RoleCatcher dives into some of the less obvious ones that you gotta have to make it in this line of work. They talk about knowing different types of metal. We touched on that earlier, but also things like you got to really have an eye for detail and be serious about safety.
And those are non-starters for sure. Remember we were talking about potentially harmful chemicals and fumes? Well, a good scrap metal operative doesn't just know about those risks, they're way ahead of them.
Yeah.
Always working to make things safer, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them.
It's like safety first, but like 10 times more intense.
Totally. You've got all this heavy machinery, sharp edges everywhere, and the stuff you're working with can be unpredictable. So you got to be aware of what's going on around you all the time, thinking about those risks, and just putting safety above everything else.
And you got to be able to speak up if you see something that's not right, too.
100%. You need that kind of courage, especially when you're the one in charge. And speaking of different roles, RoleCatcher mentions some other job titles you find in this world, things like gear machinist or water jet cutter operator. Those sound a little more high-tech, don't
I
they?
do. Sounds like those require some pretty specific skills. What's the connection there?
It's pretty cool, actually. Those other jobs, they give you a peek into the whole world of metalworking, which is really intricate. Like, take a water jet cutter operator. They use this crazy high-pressure jet of water to cut right through metal. It's really precise.
Wait, water? Really? I figured you'd need something a lot, I don't know, more heavy duty than that to cut through metal.
I know, right? But when that water is pressurized enough, it's serious business. And it takes a lot of skill to run a machine like that. You got to understand how different metals react to the water jet, how much pressure you need for different thicknesses. I mean, you got to be able to make really, really fine cuts.
Wow, that's wild. Like a superpowered pressure washer, but instead of your driveway, you're working on metal. So you could start out as a scrap metal operative and then, like, specialize in something like water jet cutting.
For sure. And that's just one example. The skills you get from being a scrap metal operative, they can take you in a lot of different directions. More specialized roles, often with way better pay, and all within the bigger world of manufacturing.
So not only is there a clear path to move up in scrap metal, there are these other paths you can take, learning new techniques, new technologies.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And speaking of opportunity, RoleCatcher says that the metal recycling industry is absolutely booming right now. They even say the employment outlook for scrap metal operatives is generally positive, which is great to hear.
And that makes perfect sense when you think about it. The whole world is finally starting to realize that everything we do impacts the environment.
Right.
And metal production, well, that's a huge part of that whole pollution and resource depletion problem.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. Mining and processing and shipping all that metal, that takes a ton of energy. So where does recycling fit into all of this?
Recycling is crucial. It's really all about making sure we're doing as little damage as possible. Like when you mine new metal, it's incredibly energy intensive. You're using up resources and you're creating pollution. But if you recycle the metal instead, you get to skip all those steps.
So recycling is like hitting the undo button on some of the damage that's caused by, digging up and making new metal.
Exactly. It's a huge part of protecting what we've got, reducing those greenhouse gases, and moving towards a more sustainable future.
And that's where those scrap metal operatives come in. They're the ones making sure that that metal gets a second life, a third life, heck, maybe even a fourth life.
They're the unsung heroes of sustainability, for sure. And as the need for recycled metal keeps growing, which it definitely will, their job just gets more and more important.
It's a job with a real future, and they're making a real difference. That's really inspiring to hear. But what does that demand even look like? I mean, is it just those old cars and appliances we're talking about? Or are there other industries driving that demand for recycled metal? It's got to be more than just those rusty old washing machines, right?
Way more. Think about all the electronics we use, like every single day. Our phones, laptops, even those fancy electric cars everyone's riding these days, they're all full of metal. And a lot of it is getting harder and harder to find, not to mention expensive to mine.
So this whole push for like a greener future is actually pushing up the demand for recycled metals.
You got it. And it's only going to get bigger. As we're switching over to things like solar and wind power, we need a ton of metal for those solar panels, those giant wind turbines, even just the stuff that holds them up. And recycling is how we keep up with that demand without, trashing the planet.
That's pretty amazing. So from keeping the lights on in our houses to like literally driving our cars, recycled metal is essential. Makes you think twice about that old phone you've got stashed in a drawer somewhere.
I know, right? It really makes you think about the bigger picture. We've been talking about how important scrap metal operators are, and they are, but they're really just one piece of this whole thing, and we're all part of it.
I'm listening. What's the bigger picture?
It's like the story of our stuff, Everything we use, all these gadgets, appliances, that metal we were talking about, it comes from somewhere, and it's got to go somewhere. And the choices we make, even if we don't realize it, they have a huge impact, all the way down the line to those scrap metal yards we've been talking about.
So you're saying we've all got a part to play in this whole recycling thing?
100%. It's not enough to just chuck something in the recycling bin and forget about it. We got to be smarter about what we buy in the first place, how long we use it, and what happens to it when we're done with it.
It's like we're all running a relay race or something, and the scrap metal operatives, they're the ones carrying the baton for a really important stretch.
Love that. And just like in a relay race, everyone's got to do their part. So next time you're thinking about getting the latest gadget, whatever it is, ask yourself, what's going to happen to this when I don't want it anymore? Can I get it fixed? Can it even be recycled? We should all be asking those questions.
It's about like really understanding where our stuff comes from and where it goes,
Yeah.
not just, out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. And it's not all on us either. We need bigger changes, like designing stuff that can actually be recycled easily, making sure there are good ways to recycle all over the place, and making sure everyone working in this whole system is treated fairly.
So our deep dive into scrap metal operatives turned into a deep dive into, well, everything.
It's all connected.
And that's a wrap on this episode, everybody. We hope you learned a thing or two about the awesome people working behind the scenes in the recycling world, those scrap metal operatives. And even more than that, we hope this gets you thinking about how you can be a little more mindful about what you buy and what happens to it. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.